Let's spend some time talking about using academic tone. Sometimes you'll hear this as academic voice or an academic or professional register or formal. Lots and lots of words go with this. First, let's figure out what does it look like when it's an error. So here is a formal paper that has a contraction in it, and so you'll see that makes it a little bit more informal or casual. And then we also have the words your and you that talks directly to the reader, making it a personal connection with the reader, which might be inappropriate in this particular case. But why does it matter? Why can't I be a little bit more casual or informal with my reader? When I'm writing academically, I always want to be recognized as the expert. So your paper, when you are answering a question academically or making an argument academically, you want to set yourself apart. You are the expert, and how you say that you're the expert is your tone of voice. It defines and establishes that relationship with your audience. Maintaining that academic tone actually increases your credibility because you don't sound emotional or like you're just saying something just because. It keeps you in a place that people can trust. We also want to make sure that logic is the thing that we're focused on in academic writing rather than emotion, because that's what, in theory, we're relying on. We might use the other things, but we probably want to be a little bit more sneaky about it. Otherwise, people are going to think that we are being overly emotional. And in general, when somebody is reading an argument, if they might think about an author as, a writer as hysterical or overly involved if they get caught up in overly emotional language. So the key here, though, is choosing your tone. And when you choose a tone, you show your understanding of audience and purpose. And there are lots and lots of times when you're not going to use a formal tone. Just in the same way that when you talk to your little puppy dog, your voice changes and the words that you use might be different than if you were, say, making fun of the Queen of England. I don't have a good register for that one. Or if you are talking to a professor or a boss or a teacher. Even the president of the United States has to shift register, or politicians when they are giving a formal speech, like after a disaster or when they're introducing a bill. It's going to be more formal than if they're meeting with the local Kiwanis club. So thinking about that, so here we are always going to be writing academically. That should be your default, to say, if I'm writing in school, this is what I want to start out with, and then I'll think about other things. So here it's where you're showing your expertise. So this is also going to happen in a lot of your other classes, is that you're going to want to try to stay academic or formal. Specifically in this class, your nonfiction responses, your literary analyses, your formal essays. Always think on tests and assessments that you want to be as formal and removed as possible. There are going to be lots of times in your life when you absolutely want to write in less formal tone or register. And in our class, we're going to be writing a lot of things that are less, that are not going to be in that academic tone. So if you think about your audience, if you're not writing for other academics to convince them, then you might choose a non-academic register. So if you're writing a letter, you would sound really, really awkward unless you're writing a cover letter for a job. If you're writing a letter to grandma, that would sound really awkward. If you're writing a speech, again, you're going to choose a register, but in a lot of cases, you will use contractions and maybe ask rhetorical questions and things like that you wouldn't necessarily do when writing an academic paper. Whenever you're writing creatively, poetry, stories, things like that, you are going to choose the specific tone that's best for that. Just keep in mind that practicing a formal academic tone allows you to heighten your awareness of the language choices you make, and that's why we think this is important. And then you'll develop a greater skill at targeting your audience with a specific purpose and aligning your tone. And at that point, you might choose to shift your register appropriately. But for right now, you really want to practice that tone so that you know when you're straying outside of it that it's on purpose. General guidelines. What are you going to do to maintain that academic tone? First, you're going to keep it impersonal. Don't refer to yourself as the writer. Don't refer directly to the reader. So you're going to avoid any of these words, these personal pronouns. That doesn't mean that you're going to avoid other pronouns like he, she, it, they, are all fine. Just not connecting directly to the reader. You're going to also keep it impersonal by using statements instead of questions. Rhetorical questions are beautiful when used appropriately. They are not appropriate when we're writing in an academic setting because you're the expert. And so you want to say the answers, not have somebody else give you the answers, because that makes them the experts rather than you. You should also, in this same way, avoid saying yes or no to an implied question. Instead, just say what you mean. Otherwise, you lose your formality and you're potentially inviting that audience in. Keep it formal by expanding contractions. So instead of saying can't, cannot. There are so many contractions out there that you'll just want to use the actual full words instead of the short words. Keep it formal by using specific words that are more knowledge rather than feeling words. So instead of kid, use child. You're not in a formal paper going to say, these people went back to their crib. You're going to say they went back to their house, because that is more formal and academic. You're also going to, that says expand contractions. You're actually avoiding exclamation and emotion. I'm sorry about that. You're keeping it on emotional here. So avoid exclamations. You don't want to have too much emotion because people won't take you as seriously. This one might seem strange to you that you're going to avoid adverbs. When we write academically, we are removing emotion, and adverbs tend to add emotion and unnecessary adjectives. So we are letting verbs and the argument do the work more than anything else. These adverbs will often fall into strong emotional or judging language. So calling something ridiculous or fake or anything like that makes you seem emotional when people might be more convinced if they don't think that you're just throwing a fit about this. So trying to take those pieces of language out there. So let's take a look at some examples. I only have professional examples here because student papers are going to fall into the same thing. And the professional level, I think, will help you a little bit more in thinking when people are using this particular mode of language and when they aren't. So let's look at some of those examples. I pulled a random page from Wikipedia here, and you'll notice that even though Wikipedia is crowdsourced, it's all written in academic language. It is impersonal. It's not saying about, Squirm is the best movie ever, It's here are the facts. And so it's written in removed language. So really good if you want examples of formal or unemotional language. Good place to go as a model Wikipedia. I pulled up one of the basic pages from Vanderbilt University where they're trying to sell themselves, and they are trying to look smart and sophisticated and academic. And so they're using relatively formal language here, not overly familiar or casual or connecting directly with the audience. They'll try to connect directly with the audience in the admissions section. So let's take a look at 3 different articles from 3 different places and 3 different types of writers that are dealing with the same idea, so that we can consider the source, the audience, and the purpose, and really why they've chosen those registers. Not all of these are formal, but they've made specific choices. You won't have that choice when you're writing academically. But let's take a look at this first one. This one is written by a conservative person with his opinion here in the New York Times. And so if you take a really quick read, you can get a feel for it. And let's take a look at some of the clues that are less formal. So this author has thrown in some contractions and the word you that makes it more personal and relatable. But if you look at a lot of the language, this first idea arguably betrays the theory's key insight. The second extends structural analysis beyond what it can reasonably bear. A lot of those are removed, are more formal in terms of language, that makes it say, I'm not freaking out here. It's a logical argument, but I want you to relate to me and think that you are part of this. So that's where some specific tone choices have been made. Here's a response to that article in the Atlantic by one of the preeminent anti-racist authors and thinkers out there. And this one has even a very different tone than some of the other things that he writes. So let's take a look at some of the markers here. In his argument that there's no debate over critical race theory, he's got a lot of informal words. He's got we, our, we've got contractions here, we've got a kind of judgmental language, so-called culture war. We have things that are emphasized with italics. These are emotional ways to communicate. And so he is making an emotional argument here. There are other parts of this particular article that are less emotional, just like there are other parts of the other article that I looked at that were a little bit more connecting and informal. Then we have this last one. This one was found in Scientific American. And here, if you read through, you won't see any of those markers that I just mentioned on the Kendi article. You're going to see very, very formal language throughout, a removed professional tone throughout in order to make a academic case, essentially, for anti-racism. And so I will tell you that Scientific American sometimes, often doesn't use the contractions, but often does use the personal connection, the we, us, our, or the you, in order to kind of connect. But here there's more of a removal, I think, because of the emotion in the ideas themselves. So by removing the emotion from the language, it feels more objective. So those are some of the things that they've considered. So now let's figure out how to find and edit for it in your own work. Command F is going to be your good friend here again. You can type each of these words in to see if you have them somewhere in your paper. It will highlight those for you, and you can replace them. For these personal pronouns, you can replace them with the more appropriate word. Often you're like, well, I mean we. But who do you actually mean as we? Do you mean, students in the 21st century? Do you mean parents of preschoolers? Figure out exactly who it is. Often when we use these words, especially on the bottom, we often are just being lazy and not really thinking about the specific core group of people that we're talking about. So instead, get specific. Here you're going to Command F for an apostrophe to see if you have any contractions. You might have other apostrophes in your paper that indicate possession, or they might be internal quotation marks. Those are all fine, as is anything in a quotation, inside of a quotation that you've taken out, or in a title. But if it's a contraction that's not in a quotation, then you're going to expand that into the words. Same thing with question marks and exclamation points, is you're going to remove that dialogue and that emotion from your paper in order to edit. Make it visible and read it objectively, your paper, because you know what you meant and you already have the feelings about it. So trying to see it without your emotion is hard. So expand that font to 36 or 38 points, and then start at the bottom of your paper and scroll to the top, reading one sentence at a time for the overall tone. What is this sentence saying, and how does it say it? How does it feel when it's saying it? In order to avoid this in the future, this is probably easier to avoid than it is to fix it. So before you write, think about who you want to be, how you want your audience to see you. If you're writing academically, you don't have a whole lot of a choice. You are going to write in a formal register, and then you're going to say, oh, I'm in charge here. I am the person with all of the expertise, so that's the tone that I need to go with. As you're writing, write purposefully and maintain that persona. You might do something silly, like when you're writing an academic paper, you might, put on a particular hat that makes you feel like, if you've got a top hat at home, or a monocle that makes you feel more formal. That might help you stay in character a little bit more instead of kind of slipping into how you might talk to your friends. Having your friends on FaceTime as you're typing is probably not going to be helpful for your overall tone. So try to maintain that persona. And then after, edit it with a checklist so that you can Command F for all of those things. And then also seek feedback. Have somebody else read it just for tone. Remember always to tell somebody that you're asking them to give you feedback on your paper, tell them exactly what they're looking for. And here you're going to say, I want to know if my tone is academic. And those are some good ways to find that and avoid that.